Welcome to the 30/30 Health Podcast. The following discussion is for education and entertainment. It is not intended to diagnose or treat disease. Please do not apply any of this information without first discussing it with your doctor. Here is your host, Dr. Ruiz.
Hello everyone, my guest today is Dr. Michael T. Nelson. Dr. Mike has spent the last 18 years of his life learning how the human body works, specifically focusing on how to properly condition it to burn fat and become stronger, more flexible, and healthier. He has a PhD in Exercise Physiology, a BA in Natural Science, and a Master's in Biomechanics, and he's an adjunct professor and member of the American College of Sports Medicine. The techniques he's developed and the results Mike gets for his clients have been featured in international magazines and scientific publications and on websites across the globe. Thanks for sharing my message with your family and friends. If you enjoyed the show, remember to leave a review on iTunes. I hope you enjoyed this interview.
Super excited to be here with Dr. Michael T. Nelson. Mike, how's it going?
I'm good. How are you today, Doc?
Well, I'm just having fun. We've been trying to set up this call for a while. I think I approached you at PaleoFX. And, we've been to a couple of conferences and we hung out, had breakfast every day at AHS. And then time changes and I started to work, but we finally got it together.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm excited to be here. Thank you so much.
So, in true 30/30 health fashion, why don't you tell my listeners your hero story?
The semi-short version, how I got into the kind of health and fitness was that I stole this joke from a comedian, but it's actually true. I can't remember who the comedian was, but his joke was that if you had in high school when you're picking for sports, you've got the one person who's got like the broken leg and has got like the Coke bottle, glasses, and you're left between picking that person or picking me. You'll pick the person who has the broken leg and the Coke bottle glasses because you definitely did not want me on your team. I was more of a detriment by far than anything else. I would get hit in the face with balls, just like baseball and anything with a ball sport was absolutely the worst thing. Like I would just pray, I would stand in the outfield and go, oh God, please don't let it come to me. Please don't let it come to me. And the worst ones were like the easy ones, right? So where it comes straight down, it would literally almost like a couple times it did hit me in the face. And it didn't make any sense to me. And I just thought, I'm just, unathletic. That's just the way that it was. Signed up for basketball, played horribly, actually had huge glasses. I had to get a strap because I kept sweating so much. They kept falling off my face. Had so many knee problems. I stopped doing that in about 10th grade. Signed up for golf instead, which was just a free excuse to go whack balls into trees, basically. And I'd always been interested in anatomy and physiology and biomechanics, but I didn't know what to do with it. So I used to have this 10-scale large radio-controlled car, and I would spend just hours upon hours by myself modifying it and racing it and making new little parts for it. And so someone was like, oh, well, you should go into biomedical engineering because you obviously like, engineering type stuff. You like physiology. And I'm like, oh, okay. So I did an undergrad at St. Scholastica in Duluth, Minnesota, and then went on and did 2 years postgraduate work at Michigan Tech in the UP in Michigan there with all the Upers and lots of snow. And then spent 2.5 years there doing my master's in mechanical engineering. I was more in biomechanics, which was initially my research was in what's called solid mechanics, which is the advanced study of how crap breaks. But I couldn't get any funding, so I went over to the Center for Biomedical Engineering, which had just opened. And they said, oh, great, we've got a new project. It's on heat transfer. And I'm like, but I kind of skipped out of those heat transfer classes. He's like, oh, no worries. Here's a book on thermodynamics 2 and heat transfer 1. You've got 4 weeks before it starts in January. Just go home and teach yourself over break, which didn't go so well. He's like, oh, yeah, and by the way, we signed you up for conduction heat transfer starting in January when you come back. I'm like, oh. So I kind of made it through all that, did okay. And it was interesting, about a couple of years after that, my advisor at the time sends me this little clipping from a newspaper. And it says, military declassifies ray gun. I'm like, ray gun? He's like, oh, yeah, that was the project you were working on for your thesis for research. I'm like, really? He's like, yeah, it was so classified, we couldn't tell you it was classified. I'm like, oh. So that explains why there's these 3 people from Brooks Air Force Base in Texas that showed up on my research that I had never met and never talked to before. But so basically, I created a computer-generated model of a monkey in front of a big microwave transmitter. So if you have this big microwave transmitter and you put it up in the gigahertz range, what you find is the penetration depth is like millimeters. So it's super shallow. So it hits the skin and lights up all the sympathetic nerve endings. And the research I did and some others then verified too showed there wasn't really any deep tissue heating effects. And what the military wanted it for was kind of non-lethal crowd control. So after 9/11 had happened, every branch of the military wanted one as a way of maybe possibly controlling crowds and things of that nature. So fast forward, and then I worked for a biomedical company in cardiology for a while. I was Guidant and then Boston Scientific. Worked there in leads design, little wires that run into the heart, technical services. So you get calls from, hey, the device is beeping, what do we do? Or physicians at an implant, and they're calling you from the implant room. We got the little lead, little wire tangled around the valve. How do we get it out? That kind of stuff. And along the way, I just kept going to physiology conferences for fun. And like in 2001, like the first one I went to was in Arizona. I remember going in and sitting down next to these people. And I said, hey, did you, see this research study on this or that? And they're like, no. I'm like, oh, but you've definitely seen this research study. I'm like, nope. I said, well, but you're personal trainers, right? Don't you read research? They're like, no. Like, well, who are you and what the hell are you doing at this conference? So I didn't know what I wanted to do with it at that point, so kept doing that for fun. Spent 5 years doing a PhD program in biomedical engineering. Decided at some point that after almost finishing the classwork for that I really loved exercise physiology more than I loved math. So go over to the exercise physiology department, and the first day I sit down there, my advisor's like, oh, we got 2 new projects. One's on heart rate variability, one's on metabolic flexibility, and they both involve a lot of math. So most people who do exercise physiology don't take a lot of advanced math. And he looks around the table and he points at the end at me and he goes, hey, you, new math boy, whatever your name is, these are your projects. So then I spent the next 7 years researching that. So I had started my own company about 11 years ago now. So officially training people in exchange for money, which I call that like the start of the company per se, where the previous 7 years I just did it for free because I thought it was fun, which didn't work out at all because there's really not much, commitment or anything like that. So, yeah, so fast forward, and now we're having this conversation, and I work as a faculty member for the Carrick Institute, which they do functional neurology. So we've got a super cool course on human performance that's coming up. And then I have my own certification on Flex Diet and do some online training and teach for Broadview University and actually now Rocky Mountain University online.
Let's start back, around when you started working with heart rate variability. That was supposed to fix everything, wasn't it? It was like
yeah.
It was a promise that we were going to be able to just wear like a watch or your the Oura ring, or just wake up first thing in the morning, lay on the floor half naked and see your heart rate variability, and that was going to tell you exactly what you needed to do. It didn't pan out that way.
Not exactly. So the pro and con with HRV, and HRV research, heart rate variability, has been around for a super long time. So its genesis was initially the Russian cosmonaut space program. What they needed was, back several decades ago, they're like, okay, we chuck someone up into outer space. How the heck do we even know if they're still going to be okay, right? What vital measurements can we get to tell us that, the cosmonauts are still alive, they're doing well, their health isn't degrading? Because there's almost very little data at that point to know. The huge downside was that the radio length, the transmission, was super limited. So they could only send literally like a couple bytes of data at one time. So what they did is they looked at heart rate variability. You can look at, there's a great article by Billman, A History of HRV, I think, that goes into this, and even the genesis before that. And they could send just the distance between one R wave and the next R wave just in that line of code. So they'd measure it in milliseconds on the ship, send it back down, and then on Earth they would process it. And so they would look at actually heart rate variability and could see the status of the autonomic nervous system. Are they becoming more stressed or less stressed? So the pro and con about HRV is that it will only tell you the status of the autonomic nervous system. So for people who are listening, the autonomic nervous system has basically two branches. The parasympathetic is like the brake on your car. As I increase what's called vagal tone, I'm stopping the car. So I'm putting more pressure on the brake pedal and the car slows down. The sympathetic side, as I put more pressure on the gas pedal, increases the car, everything goes a little faster, heart rate goes faster, things like that.
And the sympathetic, commonly known as the fight or flight.
Yeah, fight or flight or freeze. There's have you ever seen like the fainting goats who get stressed and they like pass out, their legs still up in the air. Yeah, so fast forward now, when I was doing research, the equipment we had used was about $10,000 to measure HRV in the lab. So cost was a huge limitation. Also, most only labs had that type of equipment. So you had to come in every day in order to collect data, unless you're doing type intervention study, which is what I did. Now you have things like the Oura Ring. I use acutely. There's other systems you can use too. And you can use your smartphone or ring or device and get it each morning. So the accessibility and the cost has come dramatically down to what it was before. And you're correct that the promise was, hey, just do this measurement and we'll tell you how to train for that day. And what I found was after doing hundreds of this point online clients using primarily Athlete for the past 6 years, getting daily readings, if you condense all of that down, HRV is really good at telling you the cost of what you did, especially if you're training for strength and power. The predictive capability is not quite as good. And the cost could be because of your lifestyle, it could be because of sleep, it could be because of your training, it could be because of nutrition, it could be from a whole host of other things. So it'll definitely tell you the status of your ANS and what direction you're going in. Predictive capability for endurance, not too bad. Strength and power can be okay, again, if you understand the context and the information that it's given you.
Well, I was at school, last year, and I don't know if you remember Billy Mitchell. He was hanging out with us at AHS, and he did a presentation on HRV for the Sports Med Club. And, just explaining to future doctors, him as a student, like some of the research he has been tracking his HRV for a very long time. And someone raises their hand and they said, well, can't you use breathing techniques in order to change your HRV output? So like that's how we think as Westerners or Americans. Let's cheat the test so it allows us to work harder. It's like completely the opposite reasoning behind having data on HRV. And I about lost my mind because now you're, like this doctor is going to be like, okay, so now next time, every morning you're showing up really stressed out. So why don't you relax for like 10 minutes before you do your HRV to see if you can do that extra rep. And you can see that in a lot of examples. For example, people going to the doctor and they sit down and they're like, wait a minute, don't take my blood pressure yet. I'm going to sit here, meditate for 10 minutes, bring down the the pressure to a below threshold, as if cheating the system, not getting the correct measurement. Just seeing a low number is more important than the effect of your heart that your heart is having on a regular day. And that's the reason why these measurements sometimes, don't pan out as promised. Because as humans, we are at fault. That information we're using in a very crazy way.
Yeah, I agree. And that's one of the things I figured out doing HRV on people is there's a couple things related to that. Can you change HRV acutely by breathing? Absolutely. That's been shown in research for quite some time. I think it's better. It's a little bit of a debate, but I think it's better to do what's called paced breathing when you do the measurement. So when I did my research on it in the iFleet app, there's a little window that comes in and kind of goes out, and you time your breathing to that so that your breathing every time you do the test is constant, right? So therefore it does not affect the test acutely when the test is taken. You are correct, however, though, if I do some different type of breathing right before and then I do my HRV measurement after, even though the breathing is the same during that test, right, because my autonomic system is at a different level, I'll see a different reading. And what I found in some clients is that they would get up and they're like, oh, well, I did some breathing and I did some other stuff first, and then I did my HRV. I'm like, okay, but I want you to do it first thing in the morning before you do anything else. Get up, use the bathroom, sit down, breathe normally, do the measurement. Because I want to know what exactly your point. What is the measurement after the most stable period of time we can find, which is usually sleep, right? Second part is, in general, how you take the measurement may also be affected by the position that you're in. So if you have someone who's extremely athletic, they have got a very low resting heart rate. If they take it in a laying down position, you can get something which is called parasympathetic saturation, meaning that the measurement is still quote unquote accurate, but their parasympathetic is so high, their vagal tone is so high that all the other stressors in the background don't really show up in the measurement. So what you'll see in those people sometimes is, because I've had, I don't know how many countless emails from, higher end athletes that are like, hey, I was doing this HRV stuff and I had a horrible day and I stressed the crap out of myself with training and it didn't move at all. My first question is, well, where did you measure it? Was it laying down, standing, or seated? What's your resting heart rate? Oh, dude, my resting heart rate's like 38 and I measured it laying down. Yeah, probably not going to show up, right? That person probably needs to do it standing. Most people need to do the measurement seated. So when I sit up, I've got a little bit of stress now because I have to work against gravity and my heart rate is going to go up a little bit. But all those other background stressors now will show up because my parasympathetic tone is a little bit less, but the stressor of seated position is a constant, right? So it's not going to be affected in the measurement. And I see some people where I'll switch them from sometimes, initially when I started years ago, laying down to seated, or sometimes I'll have them switch from seated to standing. They're not very happy about that because, oh, well, I was laying down, my measurement was great, and now I'm seated and it's crappy. Or, seated was pretty good, and then now I'm doing it standing and my measurement's worse. No, it's not really worse. It's just because of that background stressor that we've added to the system so that we can see changes from day to day, that they don't get washed out by everything else.
And that's the thing about HRV, and that's, it was this promise of having like a thermometer or a barometer to see how, and I think the power was in predictive, but you say that predictive is not as strong as to see what you did the day before.
Yeah, because the criticism then is, well, if HRV, let's say for strength and power athletes, is not very predictive, then it's just utterly useless, right? Or the other one I hear all the time is, well, I understand my body. I don't need to do HRV. Okay, that's cool. I would challenge you, though, and say that I would still run it for a period of time and see if your assumption is accurate. Because some of the stressors are also unconscious, right? And so Simon, who's the CEO of iFleet, said that after you've been doing it for a while, 80% of the time, it probably confirms kind of what you thought was going on. 20% of the time, it doesn't, though. And I've noticed in those cases that there's something I'm missing or something I just can't put my finger on. So, for example, I'm down in South Padre, Texas.
Oh, you're in South Padre Island?
Yeah, South Padre Island.
That's my neck of the woods. I was born in Brownsville, Texas.
Oh, that's right. Oh, wow.
How crazy is that?
Down the road.
Yeah, down the road. You're getting away from that Minnesota winter, huh?
Minnesota, yeah, I ran away from the snow. So the first day out here, I went kiteboarding, and the next day my HRV measurement was just crap. And I'm like, well, that's weird. I had an awesome session. Everything felt great. Work was pretty productive that day in the evening. And then I started thinking, I'm like, okay, so what can be stressful that I wouldn't know? Oh, because I'm out in the wind, I might have sweat a lot more than I think I did because, right, I can't feel the evaporation as much when you're out riding and you're in the water. So I started drinking more fluid, went out, had a day off, HRV, boop, back to normal. Okay. Went out and rode yesterday again, dropped a little bit, but not nearly as bad as the time before. So things like that can be useful if your environment changes, you're doing different things. I didn't really feel quote unquote stressful from that, but it was a massive drop. So something was going on there. And I think that's the real information of looking at kind of that, again, going back to the cost analogy, and that you're not always going to perceive every stressor that's going on, nor do you want to either.
I think the takeaway with this is that all of these measurements are super useful, and they can get you granular information, but you have to be objective with them, and you have to not lie to yourself when not try to hack the system in order for you to have a better measurement, in order for you to feel better about yourself. You should actually look for the worst measurements and see how to change those.
Yeah, and that's the thing, right? So and I constantly explain this to clients too, that the data is just the data, right? It doesn't have any emotional thing by itself, right? So, and this took me a while to get over too, is even now I look and I'm like, well, I don't want to see a low score, and so one of the things I had to do with myself and even with clients at the time is reframe it, right? So first thing, whatever you find is whatever you find, right? We want an accurate state of what your physiology is at that point. Just because your HRV dropped 12 points doesn't mean now you're a horrible human being, right? It doesn't have anything to do with that at all. And consequently, if it goes up, doesn't mean like you're now the greatest person ever, right? The second part then is, if I see someone's HRV that's kind of going up all the time and is doing well, and their goal is more of an athletic performance or maybe even body composition, that means I'm going to probably push them a little bit harder, right? I want to see it drop a little bit. I want to disrupt the system. I want to have a little bit of stress. So now what I also look at is, if I have a day that's super stressful, or a client does, how fast do they recover and get back to baseline? And I'll actually weight that as a little bit more important than the fact that they dropped, right? Because you can't control all the stressors that are going to happen to your life. We know from physiology that as you remove all those stressors, you actually get worse, right? We chuck someone up into zero gravity, they start losing bone mass, they start losing muscle. So those stressors are good. And so how can we build a resilient organism that can handle more of those? And so it's not always necessarily a bad thing that your HRV, would drop per se. It's, I just don't want to see someone chronically going in the wrong direction. Because then I know, I had a client this happened to the other day. Resting heart rate's gone up almost like 10 beats over the last 10 days. HRV is just, tanked by about 13 points on average. And so I know something's going on with them, right?
Yeah, and so the takeaway is, it's not HRV's fault. It's our fault.
Yeah, it's just like anything else, right? It'd be like, your example with the blood pressure is great. Going in and saying, oh, my blood pressure now is high and I was stressed, white coat syndrome, whatever. Yeah, that's a real thing that happens. But again, it doesn't mean now you're a bad person, right?
And not only that, I think the takeaway is, imagine what happens when someone cuts you off in traffic. Imagine what happens when someone actually pisses you off. Now you're probably running at a high blood pressure all the time, and you don't have time to sit down and lower it, and your risk for stroke is higher. So let's do an intervention, in the short term, in order to control that and correct that. Which leads to the next thing that I want to ask you about, which is macronutrient partitioning, because that was supposed to be the end all be all for in order for you to be superhuman. It's we can trace it back so far back to like increasing your to going to a low carb diet, and then later on the zone dieting, 40-30-30, and then paleo zone, and so many iterations of this macronutrient partitioning. And guess what? We're still in the same spot as we were. How long has been the low carb diet been around? Hundreds of years.
We're still I can go back to the Banting diet, which is decades.
And we're still at the same place. That everyone has their secret sauce to what the perfect carb to fat to protein ratio is. And guess what? We are not, we haven't deciphered the proper recipe. So where do we mess up with this macronutrient partitioning?
Yeah, and just so I'm clear, when you say macronutrient partitioning, are you talking about the body's ability to partition that into sort of sub-stores like muscle, fat, glycogen, or are you just talking about the different ratios of macronutrients that we see in different diets?
Yeah, let's start with the higher topic. The different ratios and how they affect performance, health, and whatever, and then we can look into who should be eating a higher carbohydrate versus a higher fat or.
Yeah, so that's one of those questions that I've just, God, thought about for probably decades now, looked into for quite a while. And it's not just me, tons of people have looked at this. It's been researched quite a bit. And what I've come up with is my bias is that we have to go all the way back and look at, okay, how is the body wired, right? So what is the main purpose of our physiology? I would argue that it's very survival based, right? The body in virtually every circumstance is going to do whatever it can in order to survive. And if we say, okay, so that's the lens of how we're going to look at that, again, which fits, paleo, ancestral, all those types of terms, right? Because they're all survival based. Then what is the ranking kind of for that? And then below that, we can look at performance, right? So if you want a greater performance, teaching your body how to survive better is going to be in your benefit. So if we go down one step further into, say, macronutrients, protein probably going to be at the top of the list, right? We need protein, which is going to be essential for building, actually adding more muscle, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, fat's probably next. Carbohydrates get kind of thrown under the bus all the time because they're like, well, they're not essential, which is true, but they perform a lot of pretty cool things in the body. So driving them necessarily to zero is not going to be the benefit all the time. The downside is in modern society, as we talked about with stressors, a lot of people have removed so many stressors from their life that their physiology has actually changed now. So, couch potato physiology is not the same as athlete physiology. Do they follow kind of the same quote unquote rules and principles? Yep. But they're not really similar at all. So the classic one for this is intramuscular triglycerides, right? So they're kind of marbling in the muscle or the fat that's stored next to the muscle. So early on, they started taking pictures and they looked at sedentary people and they found, ooh, look at these people. They've got a lot more fat that's stored next to the muscle. What do we find for function? Oh, insulin function is locally all messed up and not working. Therefore, the conclusion was intramuscular triglycerides are bad for your function. Fast forward a few years, now they did something by looking at that in athletes. It's called the athlete's paradox. Oh, wow, these athletes have a higher amount of intramuscular triglycerides, especially endurance athletes, stored next to the muscle. Insulin sensitivity is not messed up. So sometimes we go wrong by taking a snapshot of the picture and assuming the function without looking at the group that it's in. So if we go all the way back to your macronutrient question, the first question I ask people is, what is kind of their background, right? Are you kind of a sedentary type person? So we know we don't have a lot of muscular function going on. Yeah, lower-ish carbohydrate diets for that group, I think, if we generalize, probably good. Possibly a ketogenic diet if they can be consistent and a bunch of other things that go with that. But if it's an athlete on the other extreme who says, I want to be, a top Olympic weightlifter or hammer thrower, yeah, now you're on the other end of the spectrum, right? So carbohydrates there are going to go up in terms of importance for performance, or if you're a CrossFit athlete, you can probably handle more of them. And so you've got a completely different physiology than, your sort of sedentary kind of couch potato physiology. So your macronutrients then are also going to change a little bit based on that. So I like looking at it on survival based, and then what is your goal and what is your background will get you closer to where you should be.
What about like people that have to eat 12 times a day in order to feel functional, or the opposite, or people that that believe that they are the most optimal eating either a only a low carbohydrate diet, and their day and life will be messed up if they even look at a potato the wrong way. What do you think about that?
I think they're kind of messed up. So my research is in metabolic flexibility, which is a term I hadn't heard of until probably 12 years ago. Dr. David Kelly was the first researcher who coined that. You can go back to the crossover theory, which is Brooks and Mercier from the 1990s. And basically what it's saying is that, okay, on the, let's say, right end of the spectrum, we've got carbohydrate use. On the left end of the spectrum, we've got the use of fat. And unfortunately, in the fitness world, everyone wants to demonize one or the other, right? Oh, for a while it was, oh, fat's evil. Don't eat too much dietary fat. You're going to die early. Now it's kind of shifting towards, oh, carbohydrates aren't essential. They're horrible for you. You need to do this, super high, low carb, ketogenic type diet. And the reality is, it's not that simple, right? The reality is, if we use metabolic flexibility as a marker of health, and there's good data to support that when you're doing high intensity exercise, you primarily want to be using carbohydrates. Consequently, resting metabolism or low intensity work, you actually want to be using fat. So you actually want to use both fuels. The question is, what are you doing at that period of time? The second part to that is, how fast can you switch from one to the other? Right? So now we take your example. If we look at, okay, what are the extremes of that? So on the right end, I call it the Pop-Tart test. So if you take a food that, like down here, for example, in South Padre, Texas, I can leave a Pop-Tart sit on the dash of my car and the frosting doesn't melt. That to me like boggles the mind. It's like got to be some chemical resin or something like that. So obviously, highly processed food, super high amount of carbohydrates, right? So what is a food that'll survive almost, any sort of end of the world situations? Probably Pop-Tarts and Twinkies, right? Maybe Spam. So can you eat Pop-Tarts and then still feel okay, right? Not that you're going to live on Pop-Tarts all day. Can we get the extreme of extremely high, super high carbohydrate dense food that's very man-made processed? Now, if we go down to the other end, fasting would be a period of time where like you said, no food is coming in. Can you function pretty good for a period of time completely fasted, right? So if we use the, ancestral health model or paleo model or however you want to phrase it, if you're paleo guy, right, and you're, walking through the woods and you're, looking for food and you find a bunch of honey, you're not going to be like, oh, screw honey, that's all these carbohydrates, those are evil. I can't eat that. I'm a paleo man, right?
It's not in my window. I still
not
got
in my window
6
of
hours.
Opportunity, 6 hours or whatever, right? You're going to eat as much damn honey as you can. And you're probably only going to stop when you get stung so many times, right? On the other end of the spectrum, if you're out looking for, woolly mammoth and you can't find any for 36 hours, well, you can't just, go down and take a nap at 20 hours and you go, well, man, I just haven't eaten. That's it. I'm giving up. I'm just going to crawl over here under a tree and die, I guess. You want the ability to function to, go find the woolly mammoth. And once you get one, now you're a little bit back at the opposite end of the spectrum. You're probably eating woolly mammoth for a good, 7 days in a row, probably as much as you possibly can. So having those extremes, the extremes kind of inform the mean. What we see now in modern day society is fasting is becoming very popular again, and probably for good reason, right? The joke I have with students, especially when I taught in person, is, okay, here's $5, and if I gave each one of you in class $5, I bet all of you within 5 minutes could come back with at least 200 to 500 calories worth of food. I bet we could drop you off in almost virtually anywhere in the US, and that would probably be true. Right. So the access to food now has never been higher. And if you couple that with lack of general movement, right? We drive everywhere, even going to airports, right? Nobody takes the stairs. Everyone takes the escalator. People just, airports boggle my mind, right? Someone just gets off a 4-hour flight. They haven't moved at all. And the first thing is let's take the escalator up, because that's even less movement than what we just had. And that's kind of sadly modern society for the most part at a population level. So if we again go back to stimulus, right? So fasting, I think, is becoming more popular, and for good reason, because it's a period of time where we're reducing insulin, we're reducing the amount of food coming in, we're upregulating the use of fat, right? So as insulin goes down, it pushes the body to use more fat. So to answer your question, I think metabolic flexibility is a good marker for health. Performance, a little bit more debatable, but we can make an argument for that too based on some data. And I want to see someone in practice go from one extreme to the next. So what are those endpoints? Can we push out those endpoints as far as we can within, reasonable limits? And then can you switch back and forth relatively fast? So if I came to you and said, okay, man, guess what? No food for the next 24 hours starting now. Could you function and still be okay? Or if I show up your door at 8 a.m. in the morning and be like, dude, you got to eat 2 Pop-Tarts right now and then go work with your patients. Could you do that and be okay? Then again, this doesn't mean you're going to do this every single day, because I get all sorts of hate mail of people that are like, oh, you want me to eat Pop-Tarts every day? That's a horrible idea for your health, right? It's just, can you handle those extremes if we tested you and be okay?
And I got the fasting down. I can fast a lot, like a motherfucker, man. But it's the other side that I have trouble with, and you remember, I can put down a pizza, as you saw at AHS, and have
I
some,
did witness that.
and
you didn't have any issues.
So have some ice cream and mungu, but I have trouble, like, I don't know if it's orthorexia, or like going to the Pop-Tart side of things.
Yeah. There's people.
Yeah, I don't know. So how would you fix me? How do you, like, I can fast, I can run on ketones pretty well. If I do a couple of consecutive days, use like with sweet potatoes and then some rice, and then I like, my body's like, nope, you gotta go and start eating broccoli and boiled chicken.
Yeah, so couple things. So the two things I split that up into, is it a mindset issue or is it a physiologic issue, right? And those are always very coupled together, right? So way you can tease it apart a little bit is you could do some markers, right? We could do HRV. We could see if your stress changes. We can look at your background of exercise. We can look at your background of movement. Those will give us a pretty good idea of how well your body can pull carbohydrates. Again, carbohydrate tolerance, or whatever word you want to throw in there, does vary a massive amount from one person to the next. We could do an easy AM glucose test, which I find super useful, right? Not necessarily just a one-off measure, but just get up in the morning, do it fasted each time. We could then do something more complicated. You can do kind of your own oral glucose challenge test or tolerance test, OGTT. We'll give you 80 grams of dextrose, and you measure your glucose after that to see how high does it go and how fast does it come down. In a perfect world, you'd want insulin levels at the same time. They're just much harder to get. And I also then have people track just real simply, how do they feel, right? So let's say you're going to have a higher carbohydrate day. Write down the carb, write down how you felt 30 minutes, maybe 60 minutes, maybe 120 minutes after. And then I'll go back and look at that and see, okay, is it the carbohydrate? Maybe it's the type of carbohydrate, right? So if you report that you always feel like poo every time you have something that has gluten in it, maybe you've got more of a gluten intolerance or issue than a pure carbohydrate one. So let's switch you out to, sweet potatoes and rice for a few days and see how you feel, right? So over a period of time, we'll just kind of narrow that down. And monitoring exercise performance is a good indicator too. So a lot of times people have been on super low carbohydrate diets and they're trying to do more weight training, interval training. They're kind of used to a lower level of performance. And it's not until they start increasing carbohydrates that they feel a little bit better. So there's different ways to kind of, ferret it out. In practice, if I were to put a number on it with, people I've worked with, most people do pretty good on the low end, 100, 120 grams of carbohydrates per day, which counts, fiber and everything else. And I've had people upwards of 400 grams a day.
What type of activities are they doing at 400?
Oh, yeah. For activities, they were physique athlete. One was a physique athlete, one was a CrossFit athlete. High amounts of glycolytic work. But even within that, I've had a small, highly ranked natural female competitor in fitness, and her off season was easily 300 grams of carbohydrates. I've had dudes like twice her size where their off season was like 220 was the highest they got to. So I wish it was as simple as, the amount of muscle you have or lean body mass or size and
or gender.
And I don't know. And you talk to anyone who works with CrossFit athletes, physique athletes, whatever, everyone I've ever talked to, they pretty much report the same thing. Pretty extreme variation in the amount of carbohydrates they can tolerate and feel good on.
Now, on the other side of the spectrum, the people that have to eat, like 12 times or 6 times a day, and then as soon as their blood glucose, hits 96, they start shaking, or they're looking for the next fix. The disadvantage, of course, is resilience. It doesn't make sense that we have to eat every 6 hours. But how would you approach that patient?
Yeah, so in my case, then my hypothesis is that on the metabolic flexibility spectrum, they're way tuned to using carbohydrates, right? So on the other end, what is the biggest sort of metabolic hammers I can use to help that? So training, obviously, number one. Can I get them to do a type of training where I have a lot of muscular activation? All right, can I get those upregulation of the GLUT4 receptors, the pull glucose out of the bloodstream? Obviously, just working muscle in and of itself has something what's called non-insulated mediated uptake. So just working muscle itself can pull glucose right out of the bloodstream. What is their background? Like, how many carbohydrates are they eating per day? What is their goal? If they tell me, hey, I don't give two shits about my health and I want to break a sub 200 marathon time, as much as I may not agree with their goal, if that's their goal, then I may not change anything, knowing that, maybe they're risking a little bit of their metabolic health, but that's up to them, so to speak. Most people don't fall in that bracket. So then I'm looking at, can I do some period of fasting? So I would say, okay, so let's just take Monday and push out breakfast by 2 hours and see how you do, right? Because if your last meal was 8 p.m. Sunday night, for simple math, let's say you normally don't eat breakfast till 8 a.m. Monday. Your breakfast is now 10 a.m. on Monday, so that gives you 14 hours already. Can I get a long period of time where it's easy for you to do to just try to get that insulin and everything else down? And then each week, I'm going to push that out by about 2 hours. And in my experience, within about 6 to 8 weeks, most people can do about a 19 to 24-hour fast. Again, there's obviously caveats to that. If we've got an athlete who has sort of adrenal insufficiency or whatever word you want to associate with that, it's a podcast on itself. But super high stress, HRV is all squirrely. Yeah, I'm probably going to try to fix their background of stress first, because their carbohydrate intake is probably buffering their stress and, counteracting cortisol and all that kind of stuff, and maybe the thing that's keeping them together. The other part, too, that's interesting is that I don't recommend people do this, but in the past, I've tried to give myself hypoglycemia just to see what it felt like. And I couldn't do it unless I was incredibly stressed and sleep deprived. And what was fascinating, when I had those symptoms where you get like shaky and you get that sympathetic output and you just don't feel good and like performance just starts crashing. Of course, I go get my glucometer and I prick my finger and, my blood glucose wasn't that low.
What was it? Do you remember?
I think average at that time was borderline high. I was running like 92 to 96 in the AM, and it was like 93. So it was pretty much right in the same range. And I talked to a few other people who had done that, and sometimes it doesn't bottom out. And I'm like, well, what the hell? And like, it sure felt like it did. And there's not much literature on this, but I think what happens is that over time, the gain of the system gets hosed, right? So let's say your average blood glucose is 95. And as soon as it gets to 87, man, you're not feeling good, right? Let's just say the gain gets crunched on that system, so your dynamic range is super narrow. Your body is going to do everything possible to get that number back up again. And what appears to happen in those people who are so driven to using carbohydrates is that in healthy individuals, we're not talking about disease right now, the gain of that system, or the sensitivity, I should say, gets screwed. So you start getting to like 87, your body signals you and goes, Dad, I need some carbohydrates like now. And it never gets super low, and it may go super high, but never gets out of this range. Part of that we get into is no other fuel to use. Maybe fat can't be used that well, ketones can't be used. So by definition, you're not technically hypoglycemic, but you feel like it, and your body is giving you kind of those same signals because it really can't operate at that lower end of a range, right? So again, going back to what is the range that I want to see people operate? So I have this thing looking at micro and macro variability. We look at heart rate, right? How low can I get someone's trained heart rate, and how high can we get it to go? So that would be a macro variability change in heart rate. All things being equal, right? Bigger dynamic range, it's going to be better, right? An athlete whose resting heart rate is 38 and can get to 190 during max exercise, pretty good. My grandma who's 99, resting heart rate's, probably mid 90s, gets to about 120, she's really fatigued, right? That range got crunched. So the micro variation in heart rate then is heart rate variability, right? So same thing with blood glucose. Some of the old studies that Dr. Dom D'Agostino's talked about, that they had, or it wasn't athletes, but people that were ketogenic, and they did some basically futzing around with their insulin and glucose, and they drove their blood glucose super ridiculously low. They felt okay. Why? Because they were using ketones at that time as an alternate fuel. Again, the Cahill study.
Their glucose was like 12 or something like that.
Yeah, it was super low. I don't remember the exact number. It was George Cahill, if I remember, who did that like decades ago.
Yeah,
probably never get approved
with medical
now.
students.
Yeah, it was medical students, exactly. Yeah. But in that example, they had another fuel source they could use to keep going, right? So I think the more fuels you can use or have the option of switching to, you're going to be better off. It's going to allow you that more macro variability, which again is going to be, I think, a marker for health and possibly performance.
Yeah, so I do like a bone broth fast every once in a while, 3 days, nothing but bone broth. I can get my glucose into like the 60s. And,
nice.
Yeah, and no ill effects or anything. Except last time I did it, and I was like right before graduation, my glucose was in the 90s. And
stress.
it was stress. Now finally answer that question, because I was losing my metabolic flexibility, and I wasn't feeling hypoglycemic or anything. But seriously, like I was like 87, 90, and I never saw a drop after that. And then I was like, well, my 3 days are over, and I started eating, and nothing catastrophic happened, but I was like, why is my sugar not dropping?
Yeah, and I've seen that in people, right? So I've worked with a few people, not trying to be their physician or anything. They just, not technically type 2 diabetic, but their resting glucose was in the 90s and low hundreds. And so I said, okay, well, let's just monitor it, right? Let's just get a glucose monitor. Let's just, you stick your finger each morning and let me know what you see. And in most cases, right, as their HRV got better, so as their stress got better, as we got rid of their sleep debt, as we changed some of their training, as we did some other lifestyle stuff, meditation, things like that, their blood glucose got better over time, right? And there's a classic study from, I think it was the University of Illinois in Chicago, where they took a bunch of college students who were healthy, I think within 5 days made them basically borderline type 2 diabetics just by impairing their sleep. They let them sleep again, they replace their sleep debt, and the glucose metabolism goes back again. So I think stress is a major thing that's not often looked at. And that's why, again, going back to a single measurement thing, I think a lot of the healthcare is kind of broken, because you go to the doc and they do, one fasting glucose, one blood pressure, even if they had HRV, resting heart rate, you're getting that one data point. right? And what I want to see is I want to see trends. I want to see where that's at. Were you just stressed that day, or like you had mentioned earlier, are you just doing goofy stuff to make it look better, impress your physician and kind of kid yourself that you're healthy? If you do enough measurements and you do them in the same state every time, you're going to have a much better idea of what's going on with the system. And then you're looking at those trends. Are they going up? Are they going down? Are they staying stable? And that's going to give you a lot better data to go from.
What about A1C? Have you looked into A1C? What's your opinion on it?
I think it's okay. I mean, I know Chris Kresser's got some stuff on it that's pretty good. And, so A1C, as people who are listening probably already know, a glycosylated hemoglobin, it's about a 3-month average for blood glucose. In most people, in a general population, is that good? I think it's okay. You start getting into
You're so
athletes,
Minnesotan.
Yeah, especially
it's
runners.
Okay.
It's okay.
Could be worse.
Could be worse, if you're going to go to the physician and you're not going to do daily blood glucose, I think it's a good marker to look at. If it's high or goofy, the first thing I would recommend is ask your doc if you can do daily blood glucose measurements, right? Because I want to see what's that variation. I want to see what's going on. The other hard part, too, is that if we go on the assumption that it's a 3-month average, again, there's some wonky stuff with that. Like I said, in runners and people who are basically crushing red blood cells physically all the time under their heel and hemolysis, that kind of stuff. It's a 3-month average, right? So it's going to take you 3 months of quote unquote doing everything correctly to move that number a little bit. And that's a hard sell for people, right? To say, okay, we really need you to work on your blood glucose. We need you to revamp your whole lifestyle. And we're not going to give you any data on that till you come back in about 3 months. Yeah, that's hard, right? If you said, oh, well, we have a daily marker now that can tell you if you're kind of going in the right direction or not. What I found is that's a lot more motivating, because after maybe 6 weeks, you can look and go, oh, wow, my blood glucose looks like it's actually starting to go down a little bit. Oh, nice. So the stuff I was doing is beneficial, instead of kind of, hope and praying and going with the 3-month marker. So,
well, and in the other spectrum, so when with runners, they're crushing their RBCs, so now they have less time to accumulate glycoprotein or become glycated, so the A1C is going to be wrong. What about the other side of the spectrum, where you have people that are, pretty much in ketosis all the time, and now their RBCs are lasting longer, so now it's going to appear to be elevated, when in reality their RBCs are lasting longer circulating. So I get, again, it's a measurement, and a one-off reading shouldn't dictate oh, you're doing great and you can see the picture of metabolic disease in front of you, or the other way around, you see a person that's super healthy and their A1C is elevated and you're like, oh, you are going to die of Alzheimer's, so we need to be careful and trend these things and make sure that we are objectively see the findings and make recommendation upon a trend of findings. This is a fascinating conversation. I have one more question for you. So we talked about metabolic flexibility and HRV. What is your approach? My toughest patient is, this 40 to 60-year-old male that loves to work out every day, and you can see that they have the cortisol gut, and they're not performing to work. They have been working out for the past 2 years. They still haven't lost weight, and my gut reaction is, dude, you gotta sleep. And they are completely against the idea of not hitting that 5 a.m. WOD. How do you breach that subject? What are some strategies to convince these weekend warriors that, dude, you gotta just take it easy?
Yeah, so that's probably half of the clients I work with.
Exactly, and they're the toughest ones to convince.
Oh yeah, they're very hard. It's very interesting because probably most of my clients do a fair amount of exercise already. Most of their stress is very high, usually type A, very successful people, a lot of lawyers, physicians, more, I guess I don't want to say higher end jobs, but jobs that pay a little bit better but have crazy schedules and much higher levels of stress, things of that nature. And their personality will kind of drive them in that direction. A lot of them do CrossFit, right? Because they love the fatigue that's sort of associated with that and seeing work done.
Or grinding exercises like riding bikes and or running marathons.
Exactly. Yeah, ultra endurance, all the more extreme end of the spectrum. And it's hard for them because that same skill set that made them successful in pretty much all other aspects of their life is slowly deteriorating their health, right? So from a neurologic wiring perspective, it's hard to then go, well, this set of behaviors can't necessarily, quote unquote, be wrong because look at all the success I've achieved. So, first thing I try to explain to them is, okay, achievement is one thing, but what was the cost for doing that? Like, I finished a lot of school, finished my PhD, and was working part time at the med tech company, started my own company, got married during that time. And I pretty much almost basically killed myself. Like, literally. I was a metabolic wreck for at least a year and a half, and there's some things I'm still sorting out from that. And that was 3 years ago. I'm not saying I regret it, but at the end, I realized the accumulation of the cost, and I basically had a decision. Okay, and my decision I decided was, okay, I'm going to finish this. I'll do whatever I need as long as it's not going to permanently damage my health. But if I'm sleep deprived and I need to sleep for 6 months after, and that will fix it, I'm okay with that, right? So I try to explain to them what is the cost. And what I do personally is I don't work with them unless they agree to measure their HRV. So I tell them up front, say, hey, we're going to monitor your stress, and we may need to change some of your training, or if you want to continue to train the same way, you need to modify your lifestyle. You're going to make training, changes. You may have to meditate 20 or 30 minutes a day. You may go do a Zen style meditation where you stare at a tree in your yard for 30 minutes. You're going to have to do something else if your body tells me that it can't handle it. So the decision's not up to me. It's up to your physiology. We will give you ways to work around that. And we're not going to say, don't ever CrossFit again or whatever exercise you're doing, because I know you enjoy doing that. And there's definitely a lot of benefits to it. And then what I do is I say, okay, we're going to do 4-week baseline. You keep doing what you're doing, and maybe we'll change your training a little bit. Let's work on some nutrition. After 4 weeks, we're going to look at that data. And within the app that I use, again, the Athlete app, it has them self-rate sleep, energy, nutrition, mood every day. So when I look at it, I get a marker of physiologic stress, HRV. I get the resting heart rate, and I get the qualitative reporting of how they feel they are each morning. So then I look at that and I go, okay. So your HRV is pretty wonky, and your self-report of sleep is like a 3 every day. And I used to then argue with people and go, hey, bro, you just need to sleep more at night, which just never went well at all. So now what I do is if their sleep starts degrading, I send them a graph of their HRV, their resting heart rate, and their sleep. And so basically HRV is getting worse, their sleep is going down, and I graph both of them. I stick it on a graph and I send it to them, and I literally go, hey, what do you think's going on? And they look at it and they're like, holy crap, you mean when I sleep less, my stress goes up? That's crazy. And it seems like so obvious, right? And you're just, smacking your head going, well, yeah, but there's something about them seeing the data from their own body, knowing that it's an accurate measurement, and now they can't escape it, right? And having that realization that, oh, wow, they are linked. And then I'll do stuff, whether it's an Oura Ring or a Fitbit, or I use a Garmin, and measure what time they went to bed, what time they got up. How can we quantify sleep? Sleep quality is a little bit harder. I think the Oura Ring has some pretty cool stuff it does with that. But can I mark and look at your time in bed? And I'll just say, just give me your login for your Fitbit or send me the data. And I'm going to say, okay, let's do our intervention is I want you to go to bed a half hour earlier, right? And I'm not worried about how your sleep is, right? And I got this from Dan Party. I want you in bed a half hour earlier because that's the habit and that's the behavior that we can control. And then I'm going to look at that over time and see, is it getting better? And the hard part with sleep stuff I've noticed is that most people have such a massive sleep debt that even if they magically got into bed an hour earlier every night, even after a week, most people don't feel substantially better. Now, if I could magically, lock them in a room for 3 hours a night for a whole week, yeah, they're going to feel better. But I can look at their HRV and say, oh, your HRV is kind of getting a little bit better now. So that habit we were working on with sleep, you're moving in the right direction. And then, especially being type A kind of overachievers, they're like, oh, okay, cool. They have that positive reinforcement that's coming back. And I'm looking at their actual physiology, because we know the response in physiology is always going to be different. And that also, as a coach or a physician or whoever's working with them, that gets you out of the loop of being the bad guy, right? Because it's not me telling you you need to do different. It's your physiology telling me what direction we need to go in. So that puts the onus, one, back on you, and then two, gives you other options, right? So a lot of times they'll come back and say, hey, if I got to bed an hour and a half earlier at night, would that be better? Sure. Or, yeah, I've been reading about meditation, and if I did some more meditation stuff, do you think that would help? Yeah. So here's what I recommend to do it, and let's monitor it and see how it is. So they start taking more responsibility for themselves and trying to get themselves out of that loop once you've made their awareness so high. And then also the accountability, right? When people go off the map, I know exactly what happens. They stop doing their HRV and they stop talking to me. And I'm like, okay, so the time you got most stressed in your life, the time you probably need the most help is the time you're just going to disappear off the face of the map, right? And it's because they don't want to look bad, right? They don't want to feel like they've done something in the wrong direction. So I don't know. It's not a perfect solution, but that's what I found, that it seems to work pretty good, because I've tried everything else in the past, and it's until they get that awareness and they decide to do something about it, and then you can monitor that over time and set it up in a way that the data is grabbed kind of more seamlessly, right? Which we can do now with HRV and watches and things like that. That's what I think wearables and all the other technology is where it's going to be the most useful, is in conjunction with a coach deciding what things to work on and then using that technology as a way to monitor it and enhance compliance.
The saying, a physician that treats himself has a fool for a patient, it comes to mind.
Yeah.
So, so you couple this, tracking devices and with some sound metabolic flexibility, and now you're creating Supermans.
Yeah, that's kind of the goal, right? I mean, it's, because I've tried all sorts of measurements, and I don't like the word biohacking, but whatever word you want to associate with it, and some of the stuff is super cool, but I mean, the thing that I use most probably with clients is HRV, because I want to know the cost of what we're doing, and then maybe a watch or Oura ring or other ways to monitor their behaviors that have the least amount of input from them. Right. So in the future, I'd love to see devices, the push devices getting closer, that they could just put on, or if it's an Oura ring or whatever, and they would somehow magically measure all their exercise or measure caloric output, or we're getting closer to having more seamless data. It uploads to the cloud. I pull all their data. We're getting closer to doing that. So the technology is just running in the background, sending data, and we get to decide what to do with that and what to focus on.
So if someone is interested in for example, metabolic flexibility, how can we learn more about this?
Oh, sure. So two ways. The main way is just go to my site, which is just miketnelson.com. I'll have an offer there where you can opt into the newsletter. I've got some content there too, obviously. Probably 90% of my content right now is through the newsletter. And then I do have a certification on it's called flexdiet.com, which we walk people and trainers and coaches through, how to set up metabolic flexibility in combination with the flexible dieting approach. So it's an 8-week course. It's currently closed right now, but if they go to flexdiet.com, they'll see more information there. And then, I've got other products. I've got a product on HRV education and do some online training and coaching and stuff too.
Is this for practitioners, or is it more geared for your weekend warrior?
The Flex Diet is a coaching certification for physicians, physical therapists, trainers, coaches. So the goal I had with it is, okay, how can I distill down everything into 8 weeks that would give them almost a year of programming in a little bit of lifestyle and primarily nutrition. Because a lot of the coaches I talk to are like, yeah, nutrition's super important. I'm like, oh, cool. So what system do you use for it? No, I don't know. I just tell them to eat better food and
Eat
stuff.
healthy.
Eat healthy and or whatever, right? So it's done in a flexible approach. So we talk about the theory. We then break down, okay, here's your 1 through 8 top interventions. So inside peak. So week 1 is protein, right? So here's a lecture all on protein in less than 50 minutes, what you need to know. Here's your top 5 action items that you would need to do for protein for your clients. And then we have a method that determines which one of those 5 they would need to start with, monitor their compliance, and then some background info. So, like on the protein one, we've got an interview with Dr. Stu Phillips. We talk all about different types of protein, metabolism, things of that nature. And then the next week is the next intervention. So, the cool part is I have a way of ranking them so that you're always starting with what is the easiest to change and probably the most impactful on a physiologic level. And then that's just set up in a system. So at the end, the practitioner has a pretty good idea of how those things work. So if they get kind of out of the box questions, they can handle them. But they also get a system of, okay, here's exactly how you would implement it for the person. Here's exactly how you would track them on compliance. And so it gives them a system that they can implement at scale. So like at their gym or their practice. And, my goal is to cover, 70, 80% of, things that come up, right? There's not any functional med stuff. There's not any advanced stuff in there, because I'm just trying to get people to, pretty good intermediate to advanced, level.
The reason I do this type of interview is for people listening. If they have a something that they need a doctor for, they can sit with me and we can talk about doctor stuff. But I'd rather give out this for free. They troubleshoot this on their own, and maybe they identify themselves as, I'm a pretty good ketogenic person, but I have trouble going carb section or the other way around. Let me try this stuff out. They figure out that they have very low insulin sensitivity. Now they can come to me and we can do interventions in the short term in order to make them a better human. But maybe they just need to sleep more and they can troubleshoot themselves. And now they're going to be 90% better. But if you really want to get into the details and you need more help with nutrition, go see Mike T. Nelson, and utilize your time appropriately. And then once you figure that out and you still have some physiological things going on, then you can come see me and I'll gladly see you as a patient. But if you need a nutritionist, go see a nutritionist. If you need a personal trainer, go see a personal trainer. When you need a doctor, come see me. And having courses like yours keep me in the loop and having some knowledge of what's going on and what's the better approach. If I can distill it to you in within 5 minutes and spend 55 minutes doing doctor stuff with you, that's a better investment of your time.
Oh, totally. Or even if you have someone in your practice that's super interested in nutrition or wants to run this certification or other ones, you can say and use that as a way of screening clients, right? So a client comes in and they say, hey, my goal is body comp. I'm pretty good at the training stuff. I'm lost on nutrition. Oh, cool. Talk to this person in my office. They start running them through the system, whether it's mine or somebody else's. And if you get to the point where, stuff's just not working out, you're not getting the result, they're doing the actions they need to do, then they say, oh, I'm going to go talk to you and see maybe there's something else going on. We need to look a little bit deeper, right? And exactly your point, instead of doing the inverse, which pretty much everybody does, right, is come down and see you and go, oh yeah, well, yeah, I just eat, Pop-Tarts and bagels all day. And you go, well, that might be part of your problem, right? It's not as interesting for you. It's not the best use of your time to talk to them about maybe you should have some protein, right? It's much better for you to be the one that's referred to when stuff isn't working, or, okay, yeah, we got through 5 weeks. Yeah, the needle hasn't moved. I know they're compliant. Their digestion is horrible. Their sleep's a mess. They wake up with hot flashes or whatever's going on. Okay, yeah, now we're going to send them over to you and we'll get that stuff figured out in conjunction as they keep going through doing the habits. I think is a much better way of going. And my goal from a systems wide view is that, can we get personal trainers or coaches up to a level that you or other physicians would feel comfortable referring people to that you don't even see, right? It's like, hey, go see this trainer down the street, right? Go see Bob. Bob's, done this stuff. He's good on the nutrition stuff, can walk you through that. He'll take you through, he'll show you how to do resistance training 3 days a week, that type of thing. If that's not working out, okay, now maybe they'll come back and talk to you about thyroid or whatever is going on. It's so inverted now that it's crazy, right? Because most people go to their physician and their number one thing is very general health markers that are out of whack. Their physician then gives them a lecture about nutrition and how they should exercise or how bad they're overweight. The client leaves, feels horrible, but still doesn't know what to do, doesn't have any compliance, doesn't have any accountability. And they just go, F it, I always felt bad anyway.
Yeah, see you in
and
3 months.
In 6 months, and they're worse again. And the physician is pounding their head against the wall because they can't figure out what's going on. Why didn't this person do what I told them to do? And I think it's just a waste of everybody's time all around.
And then on the surface, it looks like all these interventions don't work.
Oh, exactly. And what happens from the client perspective is they go through this loop so many times, then they're like, well, man, I've tried to exercise, I've tried to eat healthy, that stuff doesn't work, right? So now they start building up that sort of negative neuroplasticity towards doing any change, right? And that makes it harder for them to do change because they believe that the stuff they've done in the past isn't going to be effective. Therefore, they project into the future that this thing isn't going to be effective either, and it's just this big downward spiral.
Yeah, like, the prototypical patient that I imagine is someone that comes in with chronic fatigue or, maybe some hormone dysregulation. They get to me, we find a hidden infection. They start getting better and they ask me, what's next? And now I can have someone that go, okay, now let's start weight training exercises. And I'll see you every 6 months just to see your progress. But for in the next 6 months, your time will be better spent talking about the things that you can do on your daily life, not what pills, not what supplements. And then in 6 months, we'll reassess, and that continuum of health continues.
Yeah, totally. And
that's the future of medicine.
Yeah, I think that's the only way, in my biased opinion, that it's going to work, right? And you can add any specialist into it, right? You can add an orthopedic physician into it. You can add physical therapists into it. But from an organization level, there's not an organization per se. There's some that are trying to get personal trainers kind of elevated to a higher position, right? And I think some of that's marketing. Some of it's, there's still people who go into personal training just to make money on weekends, that kind of thing. But I think once you get, physicians like yourself to say, okay, I'm going to screen these trainers. I'm going to make sure that they're doing the best that they can. I trust them. I know they're going to do a good job. Therefore, I feel comfortable referring to them. However those trainers get to that level. Now you've got a system that can go back and forth both ways, is much cheaper, isn't going to cost as much. I mean, there's just tons of benefits to it, right? Those people feel better. They get a better result. They're not overweight. They're not as much of a cost in the healthcare system in the future. And so now you're doing the upward spiral instead of the downward spiral.
Just a quick anecdote. I had a patient that they thought the patient had pretty bad hormonal dysregulation. And they did a lab, saliva test for hormones. Those are not very reliable, but the practitioner only had access to that type of lab. Comes back all screwy. They come to see me and I'm like, I'm not going to trust those results. Let's do some blood markers. Turns out the hormones were fine. What was wrong, they were trending towards insulin resistance.
Sure.
And so either way, it goes both ways. My time, my expertise is going to be more in the physiological level of things, and there are better people than me that are going to be able to apply lifestyle modifications, and I can do that, but it's not fair for you to spend that type of money on me. And at the same time, when we start getting into this elevating mid-level practitioners, make sure that practitioners practicing within their scope, and they are doing the things that they can do within their license and not try to become your doctor. So it goes both ways, but I think that we're running, we're looking at the system, we're eliminating the bugs, but this is the future of functional medicine. It's not who's your, who your practitioner is that you're going to just follow them. It's about what's your team, who's your team, and how are they helping you in each aspect of your health quest.
Yeah, and that's one thing I do with the online stuff I do is that I've taken some classes in functional med, some hands-on stuff, some neurology stuff, and I'm not, physical therapy. I'm not trying to be any of those professions by any stretch of the imagination, or I would have went to medical school and done, similar routes that you did. But my goal for me personally is to understand enough that I know, one, when to refer out, and then two, how to coordinate that information in at a higher level, right? Because some of the, higher level athletes I work with online, they've got a physical therapist, they've got a functional med doc that they saw, they may be having someone do hands-on therapy to them, and I'm doing their training and nutrition. So then I'm also coordinating with all those people to make sure that what they want them to do is all moving in the right direction, right? Because a lot of times they don't have access to the functional medicine physician every day to ask them questions, but they can say, hey, here's what they had me do, here's what my labs were, here's what they want me to work on. And then if something does get funky or off, so they go back to their check in 3 months and they're like, this is off a little bit here. Okay, I know enough to know, okay, let's try going in this direction again, or, let's have you change what type of therapy you're doing, or whatever it is, right? So can you take all that and can you coordinate that so that basically the exercise and nutrition stuff I'm doing is moving them in the right direction? And sadly, what I see a lot of times is those people never talk to each other. No one's coordinating any of the information, and they're getting pulled in two different directions, right? The functional med doc says, hey, all these markers and all this stuff shows that your body is crazy stressed. And then, the other person says, no, you just need to train harder. Well, now you're getting split two directions. So, can you get everything coordinated? Can you get it moving in the right direction? And again, I'm not trying to replace any of those people, but a lot of times I've even called and said, is it all right if I talk to your doc? They're like, yeah, and just talk to the doc for 5-10 minutes, and okay, yeah, so now I know, let's go in this direction, but trying to know enough that I could have an intelligent conversation with them, and they say, oh, this is higher, this is lower, this is what it is. I got a vague idea what that means, right? I'm not trying to do their job. I'm just trying to coordinate everything so that the person in the end is getting better for what they need.
And that's exactly what we need. Thank you so much. Super fascinating interview.
Thank you for your time and having me on here. I greatly appreciate it.
I think we could go for like another 2 hours just asking questions about my personal health. So how would you fix me? But, thank you so much. Any conference, any speaking engagements? I know you were hanging out with Keith and Michelle a couple of days ago.
Yeah, I was down in Austin. I got to hang out with Keith and Michelle, who do Paleo Effects, so that was super fun. And I was down there a couple months ago, did some training with the guys at On It, and so coming up, we got a few more next year. Probably be at some of the NSCA events. I'll be at Paleo Effects again, possibly AHS next year. I'll be doing some stuff with Dr. Ben House in Functional Med Costa Rica. I'll be down there helping him teach CISSN review. I'll be there attending a functional med one with Dr. Brian Walsh and Dr. Ben. So, they can just go to my website. There's a little schedule thing there, and they'll be able to find where I'm at and be kiteboarding in Mexico and some other fun
Costa
stuff
Rica.
too. I've been trying to kiteboard in Costa Rica, but I can't find any place where the wind and everything lines up with where I'm at. So I was down there last year, and I checked literally every day I was there. There was like almost no wind. Really, really fun surf though. Really amazing surf, but not much wind.
Well, thank you so much, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.